My name is Monica Wilkinson Kelly. I'm the archivist at the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library in Ovid, New York. This interview is being conducted as part of the Cayuga and Seneca Lakes Agriculture and Craft Beverage Memory Project. Today is June 17, 2021, and I am interviewing Jessica Rodgers of Two Goats Brewery. So good morning, Jessica.
Hi.
Hi. Can you tell me a little about yourself, where you're from?
Well, I've lived here for 20 some years now. I moved here in 1999, but I'm originally from Wisconsin and moved to California, met my husband in California. My husband is from this area and ended up moving back here.
Okay, and I think I read your husband, John Rodgers,
Yeah.
first started learning about beer making in the early 80s, 1980. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, his dad was a hobby winemaker, so he had all the equipment to make beer. And he, as a teenager, this is when the drinking age was still 16, he didn't think he liked beer because he didn't really like domestics. And his first beer that he had was a Doppelbock beer, a style Doppelbock, which means double goat. And after he had his first Doppelbock, he decided he wanted to start brewing. And so he took his dad's winemaking equipment and started learning how to brew. He also learned brewing is mostly cooking. It's the craft is really similar. It's chemistry and art mixed together. So he also took his experience when he was a kid. He used to sit with his mom and learn how to cook. He's to this day a very good cook. Oh, and predominantly the cook in our house.
Oh, lucky you.
Yes. And so he just transferred that information that he knew from that to brewing.
Okay, so he grew up in Schuyler County or Seneca?
He actually grew up in Owego.
Oh, okay.
Down by Binghamton.
All right. And
well, actually, he grew up partly in near Ellicottville in Springville, New York, and then when he was 10, he moved to Owego.
And so, what made him decide to open his own brewery or your brewery?
It was actually just always a dream of his. And he, when he was going to school out in Oregon, he did his final project as he was a business major. And he did his final project of doing a business plan for a brewery out there, which a brewery did actually end up using. And it was him and 3 other guys. They did it as a team project. And so he had already done a business plan for a brewery when, back then, and then skipped forward about, I guess it was about 15 years, and we started this. Okay. So it was just always something he wanted to do.
And did he attend college in Ithaca? That he happened to be in?
He went to school out in, he went to RIT for a year, and then he went out to the West Coast,
okay,
to Oregon.
I think I read something about College Town and having a friend there.
Yeah, the first Doppelbock beer that he'd ever had was from Chapter House.
Oh, okay.
That bar used to be a brewery. So they used to make their own beer, and they made a Doppelbock, which was the first beer that he liked.
Okay. I was trying to figure out exactly where I grew up in Ithaca. So in 2010, or when did you buy this property, and tell me about the barn?
So we bought the property, so the first thing we had was a brew machine. John was working for Atwater Vineyards, and he saw in the basement of their winery a dusty brew machine, and just a little small batch brew machine. And he asked if he could borrow it, and he did. And then we have a 600 square foot house, so we don't have a big enough house for it, but we put it in our friend's basement. And it happened to be a very social house that we put it in. So John was brewing beer and out of our friend's basement. And then a lot of locals would stop and say, hey, this is good beer. And so that was the beginning of that. We had maybe, I don't quite remember, but maybe a year after he'd been brewing out of the friend's basement, one of another friend asked if we wanted this barn. He helped reinforce this barn. This used to be a Hazlitt barn, a Hazlitt winery barn. And the house had passed on, so it was no longer owned by the Hazlitts, but John was friends with that homeowner. They no longer wanted the barn. So we bought the barn for $1.
Oh my goodness.
And we took it off of their property, which is about 3 miles up the road, board by board, marked, labeled all the boards, and then put it in storage. And then, so we had a brew machine, we're brewing beer, we now had a barn, and then we needed property. And it took us about another 1.5 years to find property. And Ted Marks of Atwater, again, ended up selling this property to us. So we reconstructed the barn on the property.
Piece by piece, so it's early 19th century post and beam.
Yep.
That you can actually number, and people do move, so
yes,
it's great, terrific job. And I also wanted to mention that you are on the eastern shore of Seneca Lake. I forgot to mention that, on 5027 New York State 414 in Hector, New York, Schuyler County. And so can you talk a little about the beer? I read that you really limit and use the best ingredients, and why is that important to you?
Well, I mean, first of all, we source as much as we can locally. However, with the malt, we tend to we almost all source out. Hasn't been easy to get consistent malt from New York State so far. But most of the hops are from the New York State. And the other thing is that my husband's not really interested in a lot of creative experimentation. He's much more interested in doing a really good beer in a traditional style. So he aspires, the Belgian brewers are very much what he aspires to be like, just really high quality, not crazy ingredients, not putting, gumdrops or jalapenos or anything like that in the beer. And then when we first opened, well, we were the first brewery in Hector, so there was that. But then we were one of the only breweries of the craft brewing in the area that had more than just hoppy beers. I methat's still, the trend is starting to change now nationwide, but a lot of times when you would go to craft breweries, it was really tailored towards the IPA drinker.
Right.
And that's slowly changing, where the person who likes more malty lagers and whatnot is now starting to enjoy craft beer. But originally, we were, just because of our own interest, he brewed what he brewed, and then we found out that we attracted a crowd that didn't really have a place to go as far as craft beer goes. So that was kind of a pleasant surprise, and we just wanted to do all across the board so that we had something for everyone.
That's great. And about now, how much do you make at this point? Like, do you recall the original volume that you produced the first year you opened in 2010, correct?
Yeah, so it was under 300 barrels, and now we just do about 450 barrels. Okay. We don't distribute. So it's pretty much stayed consistent with what we can supply in-house. The first 5 years that we were open, we were the only brewery besides Wagner, which is 7 miles or so north. So we were the only brewery in Hector, in the area, in the immediate area. And we were one of the only places that was open after the wineries closed. So we would get kind of a mob scene for the first 5 years after 6 o'clock. Now there are 5 breweries in Hector. So people spread out more, but there's more volume of tourists coming to the region. So the point is that the amount of in-house sales has stayed fairly consistent from the beginning. So it was maybe it was 250 in the beginning, and now it's 450.
Okay, so no plans to bottle or
We canned a little bit in 2020. And we do plan to do some more canning, mostly focusing on in-house sales for people to take with them. We don't have grand visions of distribution, which is really just a whole nother animal when it comes to your business model. And it's not really a business model that we have ever aimed for.
So you kind of answered, like, what is your market? So people who are looking for a good quality, pure beer with limited ingredients and locally.
Yeah, I mean, I would say in a way, I mean, the market with craft brewing in general is going to be people looking for a good quality beer. But our demographic is mostly, I would say, between 30 and 65. We have a lot of family. It's a family-friendly environment. We allow dogs, so you'll see on the weekends there'll be kids here and dogs here, and then we also serve wine and cider from the Finger Lakes, not that we make. So there is kind of enough, there's enough choices for everyone. The one thing that we don't have is a full restaurant. We just serve one sandwich. And
what is that sandwich?
It's a beef on wick.
Okay.
So that's the reference back to John having grown up near Buffalo, New York. Because if you're from Buffalo, you know what a beef on wick sandwich is. Every restaurant has one.
Other than
but if you're
Buffalo wings.
What'd you say? Buffalo wings, right? And if you're not from Buffalo, you've probably never heard of it. But the beef on wick is a roast beef sandwich, kind of like a French dip, but on a different roll. And so in New York State, when you get a liquor license, you, by law, have to serve food that constitutes as a meal. With the license that we have, they now have what's called a farm brewer's license, which didn't exist when we started, which has more flexibility with that. But we didn't want to be a restaurant, so we just decided to serve one thing.
Okay. And can you talk about the beers that you do produce and brew here?
So we have, we have about 20 beers maybe, but we have 8 taps inside, 10 taps on the outside bar. So we limit it mostly to 8 beers. We have 2 IPAs. We have an Imperial IPA. We have a New England IPA. Then we have quite a few malty ones. We have the Red Ale, the Hector Lager. It's a classic German lager. A brown ale. In the winter, we have a stout. And the cream ale also kind of, I don't know if the cream ale originated in New York. I think cream ale might have, I know it didn't originate in New York. It's a German ale, but Genesee Brewing was the first brewery that kind of made it known in the U.S. And so, we have the cream ale. What else? We don't do sours yet at this point. We may, but not at this point.
And I know you are very concerned about the environment from what I've read. Can you tell me a little about, you have solar panels, and I believe I read that there's a really high percentage of energy that you produce here through geothermal. Can you talk about that?
So we started with geothermal, and that's all under the ground, right above the solar panels here. And then we found that geothermal wasn't enough to give energy for the whole building. So now we have the solar on top of the geothermal, and the solar provides about 70% of our energy needs.
That's great. And you're also very important in the area to promote music.
Oh, yeah.
So you have music many nights a week?
Well, so this year it's 3 nights a week. Typically, in the past it's been 4 nights a week. That developed organically. It wasn't originally, we did think we would do music. We didn't know it would become what it became. It turns out having the old barn on the inside and having the foam insulation panels and then the new wood on the outside is actually how they make sound studios. So the sound quality inside the building turned out to be really stellar sound quality. In fact, we had a couple people record their albums.
Wow.
Because of it. And We focused on original music because that's just what we prefer. Personally, John and I would rather go and see music that was written original rather than see a band that's just cover tunes. And that was unusual. And so we kind of, musicians talk apparently behind the scenes. So they started telling each other, and that's how the music scene grew. So now we have Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
When the weather's great.
When the weather's great. We're doing it all outdoors in 2021. Yes.
And how did COVID impact your business?
Well, we closed down for when everyone closed down in March and April of 2020. And then we opened back up just before Memorial Day weekend. And we had a very strong summer last year. We did not open the inside. So just we had the outside bar open and people had to come around, walk up the stairs to come to this deck. And that worked out really well. And then in November, we decided to close for the winter because our inside space is so small. And the main day that it's worth it to be open monetarily in the winter is Saturdays. And that's the one day we really couldn't fit many people inside. So we decided it would just be easier to close for the winter months. And then we just opened back up in mid-April.
So can you talk about some of the stressors of the job? Your husband still is brewing the beer.
Yep.
What would you think of is the greatest stressor that you have in the industry? Market pressures or?
I actually don't feel much stressors from the industry itself. The stress is more like any business owner goes through, is just the nonstop work, you know, the 7-day a week. Not in the winter. I mean, we're very fortunate here in the Finger Lakes to have things slow down in the winter, although that's been changing a lot over the past 20 years. The winters are much busier. But we're fortunate enough to have the ability to close or to partially close for the winter and take some time to recoup. But the summers are 7 days a week.
Wow.
You know, for about 6 months. And I'd say that's the same case for most of the business owners around here, which are mostly mom and pop businesses.
Right. How many people do you employ?
We have, not including my husband and I, we have 5 staff right now.
Okay. And so what do you consider to be your greatest contribution to the beverage industry?
Oh boy. I don't know, honestly. What would be the greatest contribution? I mean, the view is pretty good.
The view is spectacular.
I don't know if that's really to the beverage industry. That's a good one. I think maybe the biggest contribution we've had or made is showing that you can have a sustainable business plan and it doesn't all have to be about constant growth. And that you can grow and then cap it and then grow and then cap it. And it doesn't have to be constant expansion. That you can have a small footprint as a business, which is hard to do. You're just even, if the amount of consumption that happens here, the amount of recycling that has to happen, just the nature of having business with a bunch of public, you make a bigger footprint. And so maybe that's been, I mean, my husband would probably disagree, he'd probably think of something else, but I don't know.
Yes, unfortunately he's not here.
I know.
So would you do it all again is the other question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been great. We didn't have kids, so this has been a little bit like our baby. And now it's finally, we're we're in our 12th year. So we have, we now have like a preteen. We can kind of go away sometimes and it does fine, where we finally feel like we can step away a little bit.
So the people that come by, are they primarily local, or is it tourists that come and visit?
At this point, I would say it's primarily 85% tourists.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be much more, maybe 60% tourists, 40% locals. But what happens, and I've seen this happen to everyone, as you grow as a business, the locals who often work in the tourist industry, they don't really want to go to the touristy spot when they have their time off. So, the more you grow, the more they want to go to some other quieter place.
Right.
I totally get it.
Some comfort zone, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for the interview. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about and add to?
Well, we could, the dollars on the ceiling.
Oh, the dollars on the ceiling. I was going to ask you about the dollars on the ceiling and have you demonstrate.
Well, so the dollars on the ceiling is something that a customer showed us when we first opened, and it was a bar trick. You stick a tack in the center of the dollar bill, you put a 50-cent piece behind it, and you fold up the dollar bill in this way that makes it aerodynamic, and you just toss it up, and the 50-cent piece drives the tack into the ceiling and then comes back down. And so then once we had $1 on the ceiling, people would look up and they would say, well, how'd you get that dollar on the ceiling? Because the ceilings are really high. And we would tell them and they wouldn't believe us. So then we would say, give us $1 and we'll show you. And that became a thing. And then we decided to start donating the money because we felt like, well, it's not really ours, so we'll throw a fundraiser and we'll give it away. So we have given away $11,000 from the donated money to local organizations that protect the water, and to the fire departments, the Hector Library. So just we try to be charitable and give back to our community specifically, and we try to kind of keep the boundaries within the local community. But yeah, so that's the dollars on the ceiling.
That's a lot. So about $1,000 a year if you average it out.
Yeah.
Since you've been open.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you want to demonstrate.
I can't demonstrate. I am a liability when it comes to the tack. But I mean, you can do it with Adam can show if we want to go inside and do that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jessica.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you for participating in our project. And again, this is Jessica Rodgers at Two Goats in Hector, New York. And I'm Monica Wilkinson-Kelly of the Edith B. Ford Memorial Library. June 17, 2021. Thank you for your time, and the wonderful vista behind you is fabulous.
Thank you.
Thanks.